Nice to meet you.
Shalom, shalom. Nice to meet you as well.
I've never actually done a Zoom interview either, but after listening to your music, I figured this would be more fun and more interesting.
Absolutely. It's Hanukkah. I think maybe I should light the candles for
Sure.
our studio audience.
Yeah,
I haven't lit yet.
me too. I'm waiting for my wife to finish up with her exercises and stuff. I was gonna do in between our sessions, but uh, there's still like 2 hours in Alaska and Hawaii, so I figured we're still okay.
Exactly. Yeah, so we'll save it for another time. After high school, the Gulf War broke out, and my parents they were not hesitant. They were refusing to send me to Israel. I needed to figure out what to do in the meantime, and I wound up going to study musical theater in London. London was interesting. London was a dark place. I love the British. I love the British humor. I love the British dark humor. Monty Python, The Meaning of Life, Life of Brian. One of my favorite scenes in Life of Brian is all of these. There's a gathering. They think this guy's the Messiah, Brian, and they've all gathered outside his house. And the mother comes out and she's like, "What are you doing here? Like, go away, go away." And Brian comes out to convince them that he's not the Messiah. And he starts saying, "We are all individuals." And they start chanting, "We are all individuals." And then one guy says, "Not me." So I love British humor. I really didn't have a sense of anything beyond sex, drugs, and rock and roll, growing up. And
Sounds
when
like a
I went
straight
to,
path to religiosity.
I'm sorry?
Sounds like a straight path to religiosity.
Well, it leads me to my next story. While I was studying musical theater, I was smoking a lot of hashish. I don't know where this video is going to get played, but I hope my kids don't hear this. I was smoking a lot of a cautionary tale for them. I was smoking a lot of hashish, and I had this moment, like waking up in the Matrix. I don't know if it was when I was staring at my hand, but I suddenly became aware of my existence, for the first time. And I think up until that point, I took it for granted. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, immediate gratification. And in that moment, at that moment when I realized like the beauty and wonder of existence, I was in awe. Again, thanks to a little help from my friend, Ashish.
Hey, Jews have been smoking it for thousands of years, so.
I think so. I think I remember reading somewhere that Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, I think, makes a note in his in the commentary of his translation of the Chumash, the Living Torah, and in discussing the spices in the temple, he says that one of the spices was probably marijuana.
And probably the burning bush that.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. So at that moment, I then quickly realized that one day I was going to die. And I was terrified. I was terrified because for all intents and purposes, from everything that I had heard, there was nothing afterwards. So I was terrified. It's frightening. It's a frightening thought to like just cease to exist forever. So it was at that moment I decided, you know what? I should really find, as Monty Python wrote about, the meaning of life. And so I went back home. I was done at least for the time, with the musical theater scene. And I went back home and I just started reading, just trying to figure out like what the heck is going on. And the war was still going on, and so I went to spend some time with my grandfather in Florida. And I didn't find any answers at the time. But I was reading a collection of plays by Arthur Miller, and it was called the story I was reading this story, Incident at Beachy, and the story was about a bunch of partisans who had been captured by the SS, and they were all waiting to be interrogated. And they see a chance of escape, but one person was going to be left behind. And that person sacrificed his life in order that all of his friends, his patriots, could escape. And that struck me because I hadn't heard a lot of stories about self-sacrifice. Again, sex, drugs, and rock and roll,
You also didn't grow up in
self-indulgence.
Soviet Union.
Was that?
You also didn't grow up in Soviet Union. Had you grown up there, you would have heard it all the time.
True.
America
I don't know how altruistic that was. But that was certainly the mantra, I suppose, right? And it was at that moment I decided that I had to convince my parents to let me go to Israel, because I felt like if I didn't go then, in the middle of the war, in some act of solidarity, I mean, there was nothing you could do. Like, there was no fighting going on, and like even the soldiers were, confused as to whether you never know. You never knew. Should I go into a sealed room? Should I go into a bomb shelter? They're just dealing with missiles. They didn't have the missile defense systems like they do now. But I decided that I had to go. And somehow I was able to convince my parents, to their credit. And I remember my mom, like a typical Jewish mother, ran to the Army Navy store and bought me a secondhand gas mask and a lead-lined suit. I don't even know what that is. I don't even know if that would have helped. But so here I am, in line, getting ready to go into the plane, and I've got my hiking backpack and my secondhand gas mask and a bag with a lead-lined suit. And so I get to Israel, and I got to Ben Gurion. Of course, I got off the plane. I kissed the ground because everybody else was kissing the ground. That was like, back in the day when you would actually get off the plane, not
Yeah,
like
people don't do
outside
that.
outside of the hangar. And so I'm in line at, I guess, customs or wherever, or security, and they're handing out gas masks. So I started thinking to myself, Israel's been in a state of war like since 1948. I bet their gas masks are much better than the secondhand gas mask that my mom got at the Army Navy store. I want one of those gas masks. And so like I sneak to the side and I put my secondhand gas mask into the trash because I was afraid that they wouldn't give me one. So I get my gas mask and I get picked up by somebody from the kibbutz, because I was volunteering on kibbutz in my act of solidarity. And they also had an ulpan. the funny thing is, I remember my mom like calling up, she's having a conversation with the kibbutz, and this is her first time her son is going away, on his own, and they're like, do you have somebody that like could pick him up? He's never been on his own before, and they ask her, well, how old is your son? And she's like, yeah, he's only 18. And they're like, Mrs. Cohen, you do realize that at 18, all of our sons are going into the army. So I'm a little sheltered. So I continue on in this, like, at the time I considered I fancied myself as this, hippie truth seeker. And it's hard to be a hippie when, you grow up on the main line and your parents are paying for everything. But
That's the
I had
definition of a hippie, right?
initially, yeah, it's a launching pad.
That's how most hippies
And
were. That's why they were able to do that, because they didn't have to have any, like, I think almost all hippies were usually like middle class, because they could kind of do drugs, sex, and rock and roll because they never had responsibilities. I think it's almost the definition.
yeah, I agree. I wonder how many, I don't want to get into any political conversation, but I wonder how many of the protesters recently in the United States were either unemployed, either, college students, that really didn't have anything. Probably more so because, everybody was in quarantine and had nothing else to do. Again, I think a lot of what they're protesting is
Well, the cause is right, but of course, as you get older, it becomes, you have more to lose. So it's usually young people and who go out and protest. It's who has it's either people who are really involved with the movement or the young, right? It's how it goes.
exactly. That's why I was always thinking, if you want to stop terrorism, like in the Middle East, just drop a bunch of PlayStations, just all over the place. Because, when you're trying to level up, you don't have any time.
It's true.
So, yeah, so I'm on my way to this kibbutz, and I went to this. At first, it was at a secular kibbutz, and because it was right across the Missy Lot, and it was right across from a kibbutz that I'd made some friends with on my teen tour, and so I decided to go there. But I met a girl, and she wound up transferring to Steliao, which was not too far from there, and it was a religious kibbutz. I'm like, I'm gonna go check out that kibbutz. And so I wind up going to kibbutz Steliao, and I was there for 6 months, and it was a cultural, almost Epcot experience. Like, if I was at a, if I was in China, because they're wearing yarmulkes and tzitzits, and we were keeping Shabbos, and there were two such dishes, in the Chadar Ochel, and I just figured, oh, this is, I'm Jewish, this is fun. But I figured, like, if I was in China, I'd be eating Chinese food. Not much difference. But after 6 months of it, I was like, what the heck is going on here? It was that, and my desire to continue on this journey of self-discovery and enlightenment. And also getting woken up at 3:00 in the morning to, like, pick potatoes out of the field wasn't my idea of a good time. Peeling potatoes in the kitchen, packing carrots in the factory. I did enjoy working in the vineyard for a little bit. I, like, walk back with, like, this. I was like, oh, I can eat as many grapes as I want. I was like, fill up a whole, and then by the end of the day, I was like so sick. Um, so I started asking a lot of questions, and they kept telling me you should go to go to Yerushalayim, go to Jerusalem. They should be able to answer your questions there. So I had a friend who was going to Yerushalayim, so we thumbed it, and like back in the day, maybe do they still thumb it in
Oh
Israel?
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so that was interesting. I never, I had never really thought to do that. So we thumbed it to Yerushalayim, and he dropped me off at this place called the Heritage House in the old city of Jerusalem. And the Heritage House was a free youth hostel for Jewish travelers, with a condition, of course, that you spend some time in yeshiva. And I was like, free youth hostel in the old city? That's awesome. Free food, free free lodging. You set us up with families for Shabbos, home cooked meals. That sounds great. So I met Rabbi Schuster, and I asked him, like, how do you know there's a God? How do you know that God gave the Torah? Like, do you have any evidence? And he was like, have I got a program for you? So he sent me to this, it was called the Discovery Seminar. And the Discovery Seminar, offered, rational explanations, for the authenticity, of the Torah and the Masorah, the transmission. And, they showed that there were certain things, in the Torah that, couldn't have been, written by man. And by the end of it, it blew my mind, and it resonated with me because it was the first time that I was introduced to what I felt, was a Judaism which was both spiritual and rational. I had always thought that religion was just, as they say, with Karl Marx, the opiate of the masses. I was like, the opium of the masses? Sign me up. That sounds great.
Masses of opium.
Yeah, point me in the direction of the poppy fields. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the bricks of hashish road. But it also freaked me out because I could see myself. I was like, I could see myself actually living like this, but I don't want to change my life. I don't have any obligations. I don't have to do it. I just want to choose to do it, for fun, on the side sometimes when I feel like it, but I still want to, I still want to go hook up with girls, still want to, live my, I guess, I'm not sure, sometimes I feel bad about it. I'm starting to feel slightly bad about it. So I got to get out of here. So I went back. I was like, I'm still not 100% sure. I'm still like, yes, you offered a lot of interesting information, and it was kind of mind blowing. But like, I really would like to just continue on my journey. I want to go to India. I want to go to China. I want to hear what they have to say. But I'm also like getting, my parents like, you got to go to college. You've had your fun. You went on your Hajj. Like, let's, get back to tachlis. Let's get back to real life. You got to go get a job. You got to go to college, and you got to get a job. And that reminds me of a conversation that I had with Rav Noah Weinberg of Esha Torah. He was the Rosh Hashiva, head of the rabbinical college, and it was like one of the early conversations. I was like, what are you living for? Are you living to eat, or are you eating to live? And of course, I'm eating to live. Like, what kind of question is that? He said, why do you want to go to college? I was like, well, I gotta get a job. Why do you gotta get a job? Well, I gotta make money. He's like, well, what do you need money for? I was like, well, I gotta eat. Still didn't convince me. I was like, I gotta continue on. Thank you. It's been inspiring, really meaningful. I'll always remember this. And so I went back home and still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, still trying to figure out the meaning of life. And I met, it was at that time where I met the love of my life, or what I thought was the love of my life at that moment. And I got back involved in my hippie folk festival scene, and was like, for the most part, just forgot about everything that had happened previously. But there was this, like, something was
You
eating at
performing
me.
at this time?
I wasn't. I really didn't start writing music until I got to. So we'll get right to that story. Good question. Something was gnawing at me. I felt guilty, because I had imagined myself being this truth seeker, looking for the meaning of life. And then the first taste that I got of it, I ran away. Like Yonah and the whale, maybe. and so I called up Rabbi Schuster, and I'm like, Rabbi Schuster, I'd really like to come back. My parents want me to go to college, so they're not sending me back. He's like, I'll buy you a ticket. So he bought me a ticket, and I went back to Yerushalayim, and I started studying. And that's when the real transformation began. Like, there was that originally there was that like initial inspiration, but the hard work on a daily basis of study and prayer and mitzvahs, that was where I started to have this cathartic evolutionary process. And it was there that I started writing music. My sister I started writing music to process, this change that I was going through. It was a lot. And I needed to write my thoughts down. I needed to express my feelings. And I grew up playing cello and youth orchestras. And I don't know if you remember, there was a scene in Woody Allen's Take the Money and Run. And, he's trying to play cello in the marching band. So I didn't want to bring my cello with me. I already remember like trying to like lug my cello around on like the school buses. Yeah.
It sounds like a punishment. I don't understand how anyone would pick a cello.
I don't know why I picked it. I immediately regretted it. I stuck with it. But my mom had a guitar, so I was like, Mom, do you mind if I take your guitar? She's like, sure. So I brought a guitar with me, and the first song I wrote was for my sister. She actually wound up studying high school, like a kibbutz high school program in the north, and she was coming down for her birthday, and I wrote her a song. And then from there, they say that, I think it's in the Talmud, that the air in Israel makes one wise. So there's something that I was tapping into that was really, that I was channeling, into the music. And it was that time period, I was in Israel for 4 years. That was the most prolific I ever was. And many of those songs are on this album, Exile and Redemption.
Is music kind of like your main gig, or is this something that has kind of just a big side project that kind of has taken on this mythical operatic size?
Phantom of the Opera. I'm a community organizer. I have been, for the past 20 years. I always wanted to work with the Jewish community. It was a big part of um, my study at Aryeh Torah in Yerushalayim. They really taught that it was important, to take responsibility for the community, and and they encouraged their students to go out and teach, and and to be community organizers. And so my dorm head in from Aryeh Torah in Yerushalayim had started, along with a few other rabbis, this Aryeh Torah community center here in Philadelphia, and I started working with him. And then a few years later, I wound up co-founding this community organization with my partner, John Earlbaum. And we've been doing that for 18 years. We work with young professionals and grad students. We have, all sorts of social and educational programming, volunteer opportunities. A really cool venue in Philadelphia. It's got a live performance venue and a bar and a lounge and an art gallery and loft. So we have all sorts of cool stuff going on there. We had a fire, which was, I guess, good timing because nobody's having live programming anyway. So sort of forced us early to try to think outside the box and to see what we could do without a venue. And it's interesting. It was it's shkacha pratis, divine providence, that it was sort of serendipitous that I was getting ready to release this project, Exile and Redemption, a Neo-Hasidic rock opera. What is that, you might ask? Anyone who's watching this somewhere out there over the rainbow? A lot of Wizard of Oz references today. Usually I'm making like references to Alice in Wonderland and going down the rabbit hole. So I, been writing and performing for many years, mostly with the Chevra in Philadelphia. We have these like pillar music festival events throughout the year around the different Jewish holidays. And so I had created a lot of material, and I had finished the project and I was getting ready to release everything. And so it's Exile and Redemption, Neo-Hasidic rock opera, 12 music videos, and one epic story. So my intention was to release these music videos online once a month. And then everything shut down, and we were like scrambling to figure out like, well, what can we do with people? So I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to have like thematic, Zoom, like thematic conversations based around each music video release, and use that as a launching point, to start a conversation. So that's what we've been doing. And, we've there's been 4 music video releases so far. And, the first was A Little Piece in Our Time. The second was Human Becoming. Third, The Great Divide. And the fourth, Infinite Splendor. So like the first music video, A Little Piece in Our Time, we had a conversation about, finding, inner and interpersonal peace. and the second was Human Coming. So talked about the beauty of imperfection, the greatness of imperfection. The third, The Great Divide. Um, Off the top of my head, I can't even remember what we talked about.
Well,
I remember it being a good session. And then the fourth one that we just had, Infinite Splendor. Really, we talked about the Kabbalah and Hanukkah, and we bring in guest speakers every month. Um, yeah,
so how did this like? Was this an idea you had for a long time? Where did this kind of come about?
I hadn't started out with the intention of creating a rock opera or a visual film,
Or
or a rock
Neo-Hasidic rock opera?
or a neo-Hasidic rock opera. Like, it was the furthest thing from my mind. I had these collection of songs, and then I decided that I wanted to record them. I had waited a long time to do that, and I decided that I wanted to curate, from my material, all the essential ideas that brought me back to Judaism. Because like there were a lot of like philosophical songs, love songs, humor. Uh, so I decided I wanted to curate from that and all the essential ideas. And so I started working with um, this producer Barry McGuire. He was the bass player for Natalie Merchant and also helped produce her along with, and then later, um, you know what? I got that wrong. No, I didn't. I got it right because he was also the bass player for the Wallflowers, Jacob Dylan's band, and then later he produced Amos Lee among many others. And so I had a friend, who I had met at a. You can take that.
I was just telling my wife to make it a little bit less loud, very thin walls.
Okay, cool. Um, it'd be funny, like if you never see that on like late night talk shows. Like, kind of like gets a phone call. He's like, "Sorry, I really need to take this." um, so I had a friend that I had met at it was a housewarming party, and he heard me playing one of my songs, and he was inspired by the music. So he's like, he was in the music industry, and he wanted, so he's like, I got to introduce you to Barry McGuire. I think he'd really enjoy working with you. And so um, we created the album together, and then one night. So I've had a pretty rocky. It's a Philadelphia, not a Philadelphia reference. uh, Rocky Balboa,
Right,
Philadelphia. I
got
had
it.
a pretty, where I'm from, if anyone's wondering, pretty rocky, past 20 years. I've been divorced twice, and reminds me of the joke. There are three rings in marriage. There's the engagement ring, there's the wedding ring, and there's the suffering.
Well, I would say, a lot of people have trouble getting married once, so I think you managed to do it twice. I, I mean, divorces happen, and but also, congrats, you managed to get married twice as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's better to love and lose than never love at all. I
Exactly.
absolutely. I mean, I had great experiences with both of my ex-wives, and I don't know why it's any different. Like, people like have boyfriend and girlfriends and break up all the time. I felt that it was important, to have commitment and to get married and, have kids and build a life. I think, I believe in family values and as a fabric of society. And um, people
Well,
might want to argue with me, okay? But that was my dream. My dream was, I remember sitting around the Shabbos table in Yerushalayim, and and it was, the loving husband and wife and their doting, children, and the chicken soup for the soul. It was powerful, and That's what I wanted.
If long marriage was so easy, we wouldn't glorify it anytime we see somebody with a marriage of 40 or 50 years. Uh, I think we kind of look at those cases and we think this is normal, but if it was normal, we wouldn't really look at it, right?
Right, right. There should be like awards given. Like they should have an Academy Award show for like, you know, the longest loving marriage in the world. Um,
No one would
I
have
nobody would what?
it. No one would have it.
Nobody would have. Yeah, probably not. I would say that like I don't know what the statistics are. Is it a 50%? Has it gone down maybe a little bit in recent years? Um, but out of the people who are married, how many people are actually happy? The thing is, I don't think anybody's really happy in life. I think we're striving to be happy because I think happiness is fleeting. I think there's, you know, because that's why we're here. We're here to struggle. You know, if we weren't, that's the point. As far as I understand it, that's the point of creation. You know, our greatness. You know, we as human beings. There's that story with the Moshe Rabbeinu's arguing with the angels because the angels were arguing with God. Like, why did you give the Torah to them? Like, give it to us. We're perfect. So, Moshe Rabbeinu's arguing. He's like, well, look in it. What does it say? He says, he asked them, like, do you steal? Do you kill? They're like, no. It's like, exactly. It was meant for us. Like our greatness, and I would even say our greatness over God is our ability, to struggle, to choose to be greater. So I'm broken from this second divorce. And it was at that point, like, I mean, I was already broken from the first divorce. And, I tried to repair my life and to try to put a Band-Aid on it and try to attempt again. Which, like you say, that's meritorious. They said they like tzaddik sheva pamim tzaddik nofel v'kum. Like 7 times the righteous man falls and he gets up again. Like the definition of a righteous person is somebody who keeps struggling no matter how many times like he may get thrown to the ground.
It's also the definition of insanity.
Right, that is true. I mean, I think when they said that, there was some notion that there would be a redemption at the end. So the one night I was in my music studio, and it was that night after my second divorce, feeling particularly just broken and demoralized, and really wanted to give up. And the worst thing that happened to me, and a lot of traumatic things happened to me, dealing with manic depression, 2 divorces, currently, like over the past year, actually, my mother died, and
Sorry to hear that.
but like during this like process of creating of the story, the ultimate story that went along with the album, seeing my mother going suffering with ovarian cancer, a lot of these all of these challenges ultimately became part of the story. But the worst thing, what really killed me out of everything was like losing my kids. I mean, I still have my kids every other weekend, but like losing that nuclear family, being able to see my kids every day, waking up to their smiles, like that was the best thing in my life. And having them ripped away just destroyed me. So one night I was in my studio, and I just didn't want to go on. And I don't know if I was feeling suicidal. Maybe I was feeling suicidal. Not that I would ever do it. I think about it at times, when life gets me down.
Sometimes we just want to reset in a sense, right?
I just, there are times where it just becomes so much, you just want to be comfortably numb.
Yeah.
You can, it can only be pushed so far. But I remember it was at that moment I looked up and I saw a painting that my mother had given me on my studio wall, and it was a portrait of the story of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement, the shepherd boy and his flute. And it was a story about this lone shepherd boy, an illiterate shepherd boy, who every day would, he would, as he was tending his flock, he would play his flute. It was Yom Kippur, and, he decided that he wanted, to go to shul and pray. But he didn't know how to read the prayer book. He desperately wanted to connect to God. And so in the middle of the service, he pulls out his flute and he starts to play in order to connect. And all of the congregants, they turn around like, Maze, what are you doing? You can't play flute on Yom Kippur. Like, get out of the shul. And so the Baal Shem Tov, he motions, for the boy to come to the front of the shul to play his flute in front of the ark. Afterwards, the disciples like, I don't understand. Like, how could you let the boy play his flute on Yom Kippur? So he says to them, up until this point, the gates of heaven had been closed to us. It was only the sincere desire of the shepherd boy to connect that finally the gates of heaven were open to us. And I realized at that moment that I wasn't alone. And then that even with all of these, all the terrible things that had happened to me up until this point, that they all had, that it happened for a reason, that it was divine providence, and that it was that even though I was experiencing exile, that ultimately, even I was going to find redemption, because life had a purpose. And then I realized that now that I had this album, I was like, you know what? I want to use, this Hasidic story is so powerful. I want to tell more Hasidic tales. And I want to be able to tell them in a way that, that people can relate to them and experience them for themselves. Maybe I can help inspire people in their times of, trauma. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool? I have these 12 songs. I'd always thought I would do like one music video, and I had written a story, for what I thought would be the single of the album. And then I thought, well, I have so many stories that I want to tell. And not only do I want to share these inspiring Hasidic tales, but like I want to share these crazy stories that happened to me. And maybe show people that it's okay not to be okay. but things are going to get better, and that life has a purpose. And ultimately, we're going to have redemption, whatever that means to each individual. There will be redemption. Maybe not in this lifetime, maybe after we die. I could go into a whole other Devar Torah about that. What happens after we die? Do we come back? But that's probably not for now. Maybe we'll talk again one day.
I'd love to play one of the songs that I really liked. I was listening because we were gonna talk last week, and so I was coming back from work, and I just, as I was driving, I put on the songs, and it was it was this familiar voice, somehow remind me a little bit of classic rock, but like the instrumentals are very modern, not in like the modern of like electronic music, but in the sense of like just how the production, I guess that's the kind of your producer and your music. And so like one of the ones that I liked a lot, maybe just because it resonates with me right now, because every song has its time, I feel. There are soundtracks from like breakups that I have. So this is the song that I really like, so I'll play that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world was created for your pleasure.
I got a warm fuzzy feeling now that I'm leaving. I can't describe. I knew sooner or later that me and my maker on the other side, and it's better than it ever was. Now I'm with the one I love. Yes, I'm crossing the great divide. Speaking of justice and speaking of freedom, what do you mean? How can one really be free when we're living in a dream? But it's better than it ever was. Now I'm with the one I love. Yes, I'm crossing the great divide. Yes, I'm crossing that great divide. Well,
The fringe of blue, sky so free, throne of sapphire, infinity. Take my hand and dream with me. Let us stand in prophecy.
got a warm fuzzy feeling now that I'm leaving. I can't describe. I knew sooner or later that me and my maker on the other side, and it's better than it ever was. And now I'm with the one I love. Yes, I'm crossing the great divide. Yes, I'm crossing that great divide. Yes, I'm crossing that great divide. Yes, I'm crossing that great divide.
It's such a and it's musically, it's a really fun song. The video is like, I think, um, it's very, I feel like contradictory. Like you start off, with people, you're antagonistic, then you're alone drinking. You find Torah text, and then all of a sudden, instead of being in white, which is kind of like almost like you were lost in white, then you kind of find yourself in black at the beach. And then it almost like comes back around. You're now in the same place where you were, also alcohol around you, but now you have a completely different interaction with the people.
1 second. I need a cup of coffee because I, as you saw earlier, I was starting to think. I put it in the microwave before we started. I was going to drink it it's been a long day. My Rosh Hashiva Rav Noach would ask, what's the opposite of pain? Pleasure? The opposite of pain is no pain. Comfort. In order to experience pleasure, one has to experience pain, no matter what you want to achieve in life. Want to earn $1 million, raise a family, win a gold medal, create a masterpiece, connect to the divine. One needs to first experience pain in order to ultimately experience pleasure. There are many pleasures in this world: physical pleasures, love, morality, or the pleasure of giving, self-discovery. We're meant to experience all of these pleasures, ultimately leading us to connect and have a relationship with the transcendental. In order to achieve our greatest pleasures, we need to clarify what exactly those pleasures are in order not to be led astray by their counterfeits. And that's what the Great Divide is all about. The Great Divide is the part of the story where the protagonist begins his redemption after self-destructing during his divorce and separation from his children. Symbolically, we see this in the black and white clothing. He starts out in a mix of black and white, bleeding into black, and finally we see him in white when he returns back to a spiritual life. The protagonist in this film ultimately finds redemption in the love that he has for his children. I think redemption comes when we create space for other people, when we emulate the Creator. Human becoming is the evolution of empathy and altruism. To the extent that we are able to look beyond ourselves and our own needs is the extent that we'll be able to connect to God, which is the purpose of our existence and the meaning of life.
Every decision to, let's say, create this opera is going to require some pain, some suffering. And I don't know who said this, but I'm sure some great rabbi, is that, when you have kind of a goal, you can withstand all sorts of pain. But if you don't have a goal, even the slightest paper cut could, cut you down.
Exactly what you said. It's about knowing what your life purpose is. It's about knowing what your goals are. And if you don't, even though we want pleasure, we're human beings. We're created to want pleasure. That's why that's why God created the world.
I'm a scientist, so I look at it from a more Darwinian point of view of, we were designed to have pleasure. It provides for our survival. It's necessary. It's not something to, take out of us. It's something to recognize, and I would almost say like value, because, it's not often that you can have it. It's about how you go about getting it, right? Is it pleasure to avoid pain, or is it pleasure that comes out of fulfillment, right? So, and that's what I think it's wrong with our society. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say what's wrong with our society, but in essence, a lot of people in our society chase pleasure to avoid pain rather than receive pleasure from fulfillment.
I don't think the evolutionary process or the thought that there's a creator and a creation I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think
No,
that
not
they
at
can
all.
be understood, in as part of the same process. And perhaps that's the evolution of humanity. On I think there's an evolution of humanity on both a physical, you have and moral. I think there's an evolution of morality. I think there's an evolution of physicality. I think there's and we experience that evolutionary process in our own lives, in our own character development.
And that, if you don't mind, I'd like to play a little piece in our time.
Sure.
Why have men been so blind? Searching for gold, not peace of mind. I ask myself what I'd rather be, bound by riches, so happily free. You know what I'd really like to see is a little peace in our time. How many hearts have to break while our love turns into hate? You wanna love, look beyond yourself and see the virtue in someone else. And that is if you'd really like to help bring a little peace in our time. When the lion and the lamb will lay down together, and the salt of all the nations are lost forever, you know that things can only get better with a little peace in our time. How many songs must be sung, singing nothing new under the sun? The only things worth striving for bring a little more meaning than I had the day before. You know what the world's really looking for is a little peace in her time. When the lion and the lamb will lay down together, and the swords of all the nations are lost forever, you know that things can only get better with a little peace in our time. When the lion and the lamb will lay down together, and the swords of all the nations are lost forever, you know that things can only get better with a little peace in our time.
Yeah, this song, similar themes, but I think on a similar themes as The Great Divide, but on a global level, right? And Exile and Redemption, it's so the first story you're setting up, the stage for, you know, the rest of the tale. And so it's introducing the characters. You're introducing, you know, this family and his father and his children, and you know, and you see that there's this, you know, the and then these other, you know, mysterious, you know, characters, you know, fighting on a on a train track, you know, holding a Torah and a sword. And you're first introduced, you know, to these two characters that keep popping up throughout the film. I'm not going to give it away just yet. We'll see, you know, what happens. And I think, you know, the end can be found in the beginning. And, you know, there's, I think just, you know, just as we are, you know, that evolving as individuals, you know, all of humanity and history, you know, is, you know, is evolving, you know, like on a global level, so that this, you know, once, you know, just like we need to have, you know, this inner clarity for our own lives, you know, that's just exponentially, you know, is happening, you know, on a global level. And that's why I say a little piece in our time, because I like the notion of like, think, you know, globally, but act locally, you know. And I think, you know, I wrote this song when I was studying in the old city of Jerusalem, and I, you know, witnessed firsthand, you know, the struggle, the regional struggle that was happening, you know, between, you know, the Palestinians and the Israelis. And, you know, I was really hoping, you know, that they would be able to find a solution. And, you know, but I was, you know, right there. I had friends that, you know, a friend. I had a friend who was stabbed, you know. You know, you're reading in the paper, you know, I don't want to say almost on a daily, you know, but there was, you know, bombings and, you know, and stabbings. So there's all this crazy stuff happening, you know. I mean, I had this, the first time I was in the old city on this teen tour, the first time I ever went to the Western Wall, coffee's starting to kick in. So the first time I had the Western Wall, it was like the closing ceremonies of the Maccabee games. And so we were there, and all of a sudden there was this like, I don't know how to describe it, but it was like petrified. Maybe that's why they call it petrified. There's like petrified fear, you know, this like solid, hard fear that just overswept the crowd. And then all of a sudden, you know, everybody just starts running, and I couldn't breathe, and my eyes are burning. And so the whole crowd is starting to run. And like back then, this was in, oh my gosh, what was it, 88? I was told there wasn't going to be math on this test. They start closing the gates. There used to be like gates, and they're starting to close the gates. I don't even know why. They're starting to close the gates. And like people are like climbing over the gates, and like somehow I managed to get through. And, you know, I just keep running because everybody else is running, but also like I can't, my eyes are burning. I can barely see. It's hard to breathe. And I finally stop. And I'm like, this is on this teen tour. I'm 16. And like, I'd never been away from home. And I'm in like some, you know, strange foreign country. And I'm now separated from my group, and my eyes are burning and I can't breathe. So I just like, I stop once I get away from the crowd. I'm like by myself now. It's dark. I'm alone in, you know, the dark alleyway. So I just start crying. But there was a beautiful moment when like these Israeli soldiers, they came and they had like wet rags, you know, that they put over my eyes. And it's a really beautiful moment, you know, just like the camaraderie. Like, you like a time, there's so much contention in Israel, right? Like with Jews, there's always contention. there's, you went to the desert island and you see there's 2 Jews and there's 3 synagogues, and they ask, like, why do you have 3 synagogues? There's only 2 of you. It's like, well, this is the synagogue I go to, and this is the synagogue I go to, and this is the synagogue that neither of us go to. Which reminds me of that other joke. He's like, I think it was, I don't remember which, maybe Ben Gurion. I don't know. Was it President Johnson? I don't remember. It was an Israeli prime minister, and it was a president of the United States, and they're talking to each other. And the president's like, we both have difficult jobs, but like, whereas you're just the prime minister of 6 million people, I'm the president of 250 million people. And the Israeli prime minister says to him, yes, it's true. You may be the president of 250 million people, but I'm the prime minister or president of 6 million presidents. So there's a lot of contention, there's a lot of arguing, and pushing and shoving to get on the bus. There's no concept of a line, which is ironic because everything is yashar, yashar, yashar. You ask for directions, like, just down that way. Nobody has the patience, just down that way. But in a time of crisis, everybody's there for each other. So then, it's Israel. They don't care that I'm 16 and lost. They're just like, they took care of my eyes, and they're like, all right, see you later. You can take care of yourself now. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like 16. I'm wandering through these dark alleyways of the old city. I have no idea where I'm going. And I don't do it. I just keep walking. I'm like, oh, I just keep walking. So I'm a little dazed and confused about what just happened. And so I somehow find myself outside of the old city walls, and I hear music. And there's just like all of these people lined up outside the old city walls watching a concert. And I hear, lay down, Sally. Dun, 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 dun. It was Eric Clapton was playing a concert. It was just like surreal. So I don't know what to do. I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll just sit here and like chill out to Eric Clapton for a while. And then, just as it happens in Israel, as it always happens, Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, the bus just comes like right in front of me, opens the door, as the concert's, finishing. No, probably not. But, and I just walk right in, and that was it. So apparently there was, the Palestinians were throwing tear gas, from top of the Temple Mount into the, Old City Plaza.
I think it's very true. This, like how this, the local, how we without purpose kind of struggle. And the world, we kind of have gone from, humans who 1,000 years ago were dependent completely on nature, and we're pretty much living at one with nature. And the past 200 years, we feel like progress is basically we've completely detached ourselves from nature. We don't see that everything around us is basically comes from the ground, but we don't even think about it. And now it's kind of this path back to understanding that we are of nature. It's hard to believe that a little bit of peace needed. It feels like we need a lot of peace. I guess
it does seem like when you read the news, you think, I guess it depends on, what news one's reading. It does, seem pretty bleak, but I think there's a lot of inflammatory, sensationalism going on. And I think there's more good that's going on that we're aware of. I believe, I think the world's in a much better place than it has ever been. We've seen, if you go all the way back, and I'm not even like just talking about living conditions, we're, living like kings now, better than what kings used to live like. And, all of our creature comforts are beyond their wildest dreams. But like, even, like, you start off, like, there's this, I don't know how far back we're going. Is it like Neolithic? But like, there's, we started with paganism, and they're sacrificing their children, to idols. And now we sacrifice our, children to American idols, but but it's not, we're not slitting their, we're not passing them through fire. So I think we've made some progress there. But I think, like, this evolution, the evolution of, this physical evolution, and this, I think that with this moral evolution, but there's also like the political evolution, like, we've just been like seeing what works and what doesn't work. First we have imperialism and colonialism, and that we have communism and all these isms, and now we're struggling with our this new democracy, which has been, we're, I think we don't give ourselves enough credit. We may be polarized, but like, the common denominator, that common ground, there's more common ground, that we agree on, that we disagree on. And I think if there was just, I think if we would pay more attention to our inner peace as opposed to our outer peace, as opposed to focusing on, a political process, if we would focus on, and our own moral compass, then, instead of, thinking globally, but not only acting locally, but acting internally, as opposed to externally. I think all of those things are easy to complain about, and it's an easy distraction, and it's an easy, thing to rally behind, for the moment, because it gives us a sense of empowerment.
It's also, it distracts us, right? If we're angry at some other political party, at somebody else, we're not looking at ourselves. We can look away from the troubles that we're having because we're, that guy's screwing up, and look how bad they're screwing up, instead of, dealing with the hard part of fixing whatever we're dealing with.
Which I think is the beauty, the silver lining. It's hard to find, a silver lining, when there's a crisis going on, and then it's a terrible crisis that, all of humanity is undergoing, and, there are people dying, and the hospitals are at capacity, and it's terrible. It's and it's something that we, need to, to pray on. But the silver lining, I think, is that this is forcing us, to take a time out, we are forced, we are isolated, and, we're running out of Netflix shows to watch. It's forcing us to contemplate, and it's forcing us to get in touch, with, our inner selves, and, forcing us to think about, we're confronted for the first time with deprivation. We're confronted for the first time, as a modern society with, at least within the past, I mean, obviously you go back 50, 80, I really feel like we're so narcissistic to think, because I'll get to my, next thought about exile and redemption, and, what this might mean, for, us as, humanity. But, in terms of experiencing, some type of redemption. But is this forcing, this isolation is, I think the silver lining, like I said, is this opportunity to really have a cheshbon nefesh, to really take an accounting of, who we are and what we want. And ultimately, I'm hoping that, it's interesting, like when the pandemic first started, at first, nobody knew what was going on, and like we were forced into our homes, and and then we were like, oh, it might be a little while. So like everyone's like, wow, okay, I'm gonna start going walking every day. I'm gonna take this opportunity to finish some projects and like get in shape, and like by the time it's all over, I'm gonna lose 20 pounds. I'm gonna have a six-pack. Right now I've got a bit of a keg. So I remember I was like, all right, I'm gonna start walking. I really, I should really start walking. So I remember going out, and like you would see people, and like there was this appreciation. You were like, hey, I haven't seen anybody in a while. So it's so nice to see you. And like you're so thankful to the people that are working the registers, because you knew that like they were putting themselves at risk, and they didn't want to be there, but to like
They'd starve to death if they didn't do that.
right. Like we just we don't appreciate how fortunate we are, and how this and the true suffering that like other people are going through. So there's like, I think people who are, I don't want to call it entitled, I don't want to call it because I don't think it's about knocking ourselves and down a peg. I think it's about taking account and making sure that we lift other people up. It's not about knocking ourselves down. It's about lifting other people up. But there's this appreciation at the beginning. And then I was like, this is going to be awesome. Like everybody's, they're inside, and you know what? When this is all over, like there's going to be peace and harmony. And, and then the riots broke out, and then there was more and more, confrontation, and as the political, as the election, got closer and closer. And I really felt, I was so disappointed. I was so hopeful that, we were going to come out of this and, as a more unified and an appreciative society. And that's why I feel like, there's this story of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. There was this like great sage, and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, he wrote the Zohar, the Book of Splendor, which informs on one of the other, Infinite Splendor. And he was it was the Roman. He had to flee from the Romans. He's living in a cave, and finally, he's able to come out, and he comes out of the cave, and he was learning all this time, and he comes out, and he sees that somebody is like violating Shabbos, and he gets angry, and he's got these lasers coming out of his eyes, all metaphorical, and God's like, you need to go back in the cave. And I feel like that, until you can, and I feel like that's what's going on now. It's like we thought the pandemic was over, and then it's back again. So I randomly picked up a book. Like sometimes I get tired of what I'm learning, and I just randomly pick up a book, and I'm hoping that it'll somehow that God will talk to me through that, because there's as the Baal Shem Tov says, everything happens for a reason, and Sal Hashgacha Pratis, that even the leaf and how it falls and where it falls and when. And I think that's true, but that's just me. Anyway, so I opened up to, I wound up picking up a Chumash, and I opened to it to this double parsha of Tazri and Metzora, and it talks about what happens. What is when a person back in the day, they would speak lashon hara, they would speak negatively, they would slander or gossip, and so what would happen back in the day is that they would get saras. They would get some sort of like something would physically happen to them, so like this white leprosy type thing, and they would have to separate themselves from the camp. And through that process of separation, ultimately, they would heal themselves, and then they would be able to return, to the community. And so I was reading the commentary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and he was saying that that parsha was actually the parsha that was talking about, it was talking about exile and redemption. And that these two parshas are the process, like in a hidden way, are talking about this process of exile and redemption. And so I was thinking, wow, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe, we as Jews, we believe that that history has a purpose, that there's a creator, and that he has a creation, and that he has a purpose for creation, and that history is evolving towards, a climax. And that climax is, what they call, that's what they call with Mashiach and redemption, and that the Jews will return to the land, and from the four corners of the world after being in exile and going through all this suffering. But before that moment can occur, right? Because exile and redemption is not just for the Jewish people, right? Exile and redemption, we're all God's children, right? A lot of people want to claim that the Jews think that we're better. We're not. I know. I've been in the Jewish community for a long time. Yeah, wherever you go, there's good and there's bad. And, but ultimately this process that ultimately is the, he said, so the Lubavitcher says, that you're at the end when you've tried every type of political, human construction, and nothing is working.
So
right?
Churchill said that America always does the right thing after it's tried every other alternative.
Interesting. Okay. A glutton for punishment. But I think there's something beautiful about that. I love that American spirit. I love that, idea of that, what? We are trying to create a utopian society. Like, we ran away from religious persecution. We're trying to create a society where all men are created equal, brotherly love, we even put on our money. What is it? The God, something about God. They put God on their money. What was it? E pluribus unum.
Yeah.
So, but he mentions that. So how do you know that you're at the end when you've tried everything and you've done your best and nothing works? And I feel like we've reached that point. I feel like this last election has just been so. I mean, I feel like it seems it's surreal. I feel like it can't, I'm like, this cannot be happening. I just can't believe this is happening. This must be, I feel like this is satirical. It's like the theater of the absurd.
I was trained as an engineer and a physicist, right? And it's, on the one hand, to create physics, to have engineering, you have to destroy the world. But on the other hand, you cannot know the world without physics and engineering and all the tools that we have created to understand the world. You have to create it. I mean, you have to destroy it in a sense. And then to save it, we also have to create some kind of technological understanding. And the more understanding we have about the world, the more we will want to save it, right? Because we understand how truly unique it is, right? When you were there and you were smoking hashish, you had to have these experiences to all of a sudden realize that you could die. In essence, you had realization that you are alive, and you had to get to that point. And that's kind of how I see our humanity, is that to get to this point, we had to make all of those mistakes, because if we knew the right answer, of course we wouldn't be making the mistakes. But to get to the right answer, we have to make the mistakes.
Absolutely. I think, that idea of you can only see light in darkness, because if it was all absolute light, then there'd be no concept of light. So I think that going through that process allows us to, experience it on a deeper level ultimately. And so I'm hoping, I'm hoping that this pandemic will, ultimately allow us to, gain appreciation for one another and lead us, to get. I like what Cat Stevens. I was a big Cat Stevens fan. We're on the road to find out. It's a journey. I don't know if we'll ever know exactly. I think we can have some ideas. I think there's some really cool notions. I think there's some really cool conversations to be had. But I agree with you in the sense that there needs to be a conversation. The Maccabees, they had, were able to defeat the Greeks. They needed, you needed purified oil to, for in the temple, and they wanted to light it right away, and it would take some time to create purified oil, but they found this little flask, and the miracle was that it lasted 8 days until they were able to find pure oil. And people say that's the miracle, but the miracle is that it lights it all. The miracle is that it exists at all. The miracle is that we're talking about it, and the miracle is that we're talking about it today. Like the survival of it's unbelievable that this tiny little nation, that was exiled to the four corners of the world, have gone through every type of persecution and suffering, is still around. And the miracle is that after all of this suffering and persecution and scattered to the four corners of the world, after what has been 2,000 years, that there was this prophecy that we would return, and we did. And not only did we return, but within a short period of time, Israel has become the startup nation and is making, not only, these, I could say it either way, but not only these great technological advancements, but they're continuing to make these, have this spiritual influence on the world. And that's the miracle. And it's not really just, it's not the Jews themselves. There's nothing special about us, right? It's the idea.
The big difference to me that I realized is that the innovation that Jewish people had was that previously there were morals, right? But they were always codified in the laws of that land, right? So they could be changed, right? The new king comes, new laws. You can kill, you don't kill. A tribe says we can eat people, we don't
I agree.
eat people.
That's interesting.
And all pagan...
Remember what we were talking about earlier? I'm going to need to take this, sorry.
And all the religions, right? The important thing to a religion, to the gods, was sacrifice. What you bring to that god. The god did not care how the humans behaved or treated each other. And that was a Jewish innovation, was to tie human behavior, how we treat each other, to God, right? No other religion codified of how you treat your parents, how you treat your wife, how you treat your neighbor. That these moral actions is what pleases God. And then when Judaism, right, it created a recipe for civilization, because it allowed people to coexist now indefinitely. We no longer needed a government to tell us things are good or bad, because religion lives forever, right? And so when we did that, right, and it became then Christianity, and then it became Islam, those same ideas that human behavior pleases God, whether it's Allah or Jesus, it doesn't matter who. But all of a sudden, humanity had a singular morality. And Darwin talks about this. He talks about it because he's traveling in 1860s. He says, how good it is that I'm here after missionaries came and had given Christianity to these tribes, because I could have been killed. They could have eaten me, as they did before. But once these Christians, these tribes understand, okay, this is the morality, this is what pleases gods, he can go from one to the other. And I think that's kind of the innovation that Jewish people gave.
100%. I think we're talking about an absolute morality. all well and good that, ironically, a Jew, Einstein came up with relativity, but Judaism has always taught that there's an eternal truth. I like the little, pithy saying, or notion, like you have an aleph, which is the first letter, you have a mem, which is the middle letter, and you have the tuf, which is the last letter, and that spells out emet, emes, which is truth. Like, truth is eternal. It has nothing, like you were saying, like, the rise and fall of empires, this one like this one like this, this is what we like. And then that's the question that we all need to ask ourselves, like, how do we know we're right? And then we were talking about earlier about clarity, and that's, we can't really achieve anything as an individual or society without clarity and knowing what, defining our terms, clarity or death, how do I know that I'm right? What is truth? And we all have an obligation, like Rosh Hashiva, the head of the Rabbinical College, Rabbi Noach Weinberg, would talk about, like, doesn't matter who you are, where you are, like, we have to ask, it doesn't matter if you're, a chassid with, pay us down to your knees. Doesn't matter if you're, a Mormon out in, going door to door with your Bible. Doesn't matter, if you're a Buddhist on a mountain or, walking around the Kaaba. Like, how do we know that we're right? How do we know what we're doing is right? And I think it takes conversation. I think, it takes conversation with ourselves. That's why we're, I think we're isolated right now more than ever. I think it requires, and only once we begin a conversation with ourselves, where we have the humility, to begin that conversation, which I think is what's happening right now. There was an arrogance. There's almost an arrogance to, like, the Israeli army. Like, everybody thought, like, our army is the best army in the world. Look what we did in 1948. We were just a band of Holocaust survivors. Yeah, that was a miracle for sure, right? That was a miracle. But really, was it you? And then in, like, 1967, the 6 days they captured they captured, finally, after 2,000 years of praying and hoping, they captured the Western Wall. It was a miracle, right? But then we're like, yeah, we have the best army. Like, really? Was it you? And then, and then things started to get harder. That is Yom Kippur War. It just, that was could have been it was a disaster, but it could have been an annihilation. And then, but things, and then later it was like they got to a point where, like, during the Gulf War, where you're like, you couldn't even fight. You were just in sealed, you're running back and forth from sealed rooms to bomb shelters you didn't know. But there were so many miracles that happened. These, like, I don't remember exactly how many Scuds, came over, but it was like 39, 49, like, Scuds that came over. Those same missiles, which were, being launched between Iran and Iraq, that would kill, like, I don't know, hundreds of people, maybe thousands. I don't know exactly. But each time, they were hitting, not every time, but they were being sent to, centers of population. But I think a few people died of a heart attack. I think there was a few, but for the most part, nobody died. I saw a picture of a building that collapsed around, this one guy, like, the entire building, heavy cement building collapsed around him. There's this picture, just like his head sticking out. But I think we need humility, right? Because I think, whether you want to call it the universe, whatever this miraculous thing, whatever is going on around us, it's always going to, put us in a situation where, if we don't have humility, it's going to keep testing us and challenging us to a point where we finally recognize that, it's not about me.
Have you read The Alchemist?
I haven't.
So this was a book that I was listening to and reading when I was traveling, and it's by Paulo Coelho, and in it, a man gets robbed twice, and so he's told, here's some extra money, because you're gonna get robbed again. He's like, how do you know? He's like, well, if you get robbed once, you might not get robbed again. If something happens once, it might not happen again. But if it happens twice, it will definitely happen again. And so I see kind of this Jewish kind of invincibility about, we have this strange invincibility about Israel of like, we conquered, we're the strongest, right? But at the same time, we have this neurotic fear of like annihilation, right? We somehow have both at the same time.
Yeah, well, because that's the miracle, the miraculous nature of Jewish survival. That there's been so much anti-Semitism and persecution for thousands of years. I totally get why we have this persecution syndrome, which reminds me of the joke my dad always like, I would be paranoid if it wasn't for the fact that people were persecuting me. For sure. Like, I think we have a well-deserved, unfortunately, persecution complex. But it's been miraculous that we've survived. And I think the arrogance is thinking that we did it on our own. And, it's the miracle, the miracle of the survival of the Jewish people, is, and the, returning to the land and the rebuilding of Israel and, all of that it's not us. It has nothing to do with us. It's about the survival of this idea. Keep in mind, it's anybody who's watching that I'm on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast. It's midnight here. It's been a long day, a little sleep. No, one of my favorite teachings in the Torah. One of my favorite teaching in the Torah, and I think this speaks to exactly what we're talking about. So B'yatid lavo Kadosh Baruch Hu yaseh ma'achol tzadikim. Right. So in the Talmud, in the tractate Tainus, it says in the future, God is going to create a circle of the tzaddikim, the righteous, right? And the tzaddikim, the righteous, are all going to dance around the circle for eternity. And they're going to point to the center of the circle, and they're going to say, this is the God who saved us. Let us continue to rejoice together. And I was first introduced to this idea, by this Hasidic Rebbe of mine, because I was concerned. I was like, what? I was like, you have this concept of reward and punishment, but I think I have a pretty shallow understanding of it, right? Because it doesn't make sense to me. Because I'm like, how can a loving God, right, who has infinite foresight and knowledge, create a human being knowing that person somehow, through his free will, was going to choose to opt out, and somehow be imperfect or lose out, on his eternity forever? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. So Rashi, so Rashi, he says, he asks the question, Ezahiyat tzadikim, am kulam tzadikim. The entire nation is, who are these righteous? The entire nation is righteous, right? And the beauty of the circle is that every point on the circle is equidistant to the center, right? So what about this concept of reward and punishment and free will? So that's a stage that we all go through, right? We also have the concept of, reincarnation. You don't get it right in one life, you come back. But I think that this, I think that speaks to this idea that, like, you know, ultimately, you know, we go through this process and we keep doing it until, you know, we finally, you know, arrive.
It's midnight, and it was just an absolute pleasure. Such a I'm glad Rami put us together. I think your music is awesome. It's a really cool opera, and I just had a really thought-provoking intellectual stimulation about this stuff that I haven't had in a while.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Sounds good. All right, thanks, Aryeh.
All right,
Have a
thank
good
you so
night.
much.
Have a good night.
Laila Tov. Kol Habrach- Oh, Chag Sameach. Happy Hanukkah. All right, peace.
Peace.